The Late Show studio was buzzing with its usual Tuesday night energy. The familiar blue backdrop gleamed under the warm studio lights, and the iconic New York skyline twinkled through the windows behind David Letterman's desk. The audience was in high spirits, having just laughed through another classic top 10 list about things you don't want to hear from your doctor. David adjusted his tie, that signature grin spreading across his face as he shuffled his note cards. "Folks, our next guest is someone really special," he announced, his voice carrying that warmth that had made him America's favorite late-night host for over 2 decades. She's a volunteer translator at Bellevue Hospital here in Manhattan, and she was recently honored as one of New York's local heroes. Please welcome Maria Santos. The audience applauded as Maria walked onto the stage, her steps careful and measured. She wore a simple navy dress that had been pressed with meticulous care, her dark hair pulled back neatly with a clip that had belonged to her mother. Though she smiled, there was something in her deep brown eyes, a tiredness that seemed to run deeper than just staying up late for a TV taping. "Maria, welcome to the show," David said, standing to greet her with a handshake that lingered just a moment longer than usual. Something about her nervous energy made him want to put her at ease immediately. "Thank you, Mr. Letterman," Maria replied, her voice carrying the slight musical accent that revealed English wasn't her first language. "This is like a dream for me." They settled into their chairs, David behind his famous desk, Maria in the guest chair that had hosted everyone from presidents to pop stars. The studio lights caught the small silver cross hanging around her neck as she clasped her hands in her lap. "So tell us about your work at Bellevue," David began, leaning forward with genuine interest. "You translate for patients who don't speak English?" Maria nodded, her face lighting up slightly. "Yes, I help families understand what the doctors are saying. When someone is in a hospital bed and they're scared, and everyone around them is speaking a language they don't understand, they feel so alone. Sometimes it's good news, sometimes—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Sometimes it's not so good news, but they need to understand." "That's got to be emotionally challenging," David observed. "I mean, you're not just translating words, you're translating some of the most important moments in people's lives." "Exactly," Maria said, and for the first time her smile reached her eyes. "Language is not just words, you know. It's feelings, it's hope, it's fear. When someone is scared and they can't understand what's happening to them," she trailed off, her hands tightening in her lap. David noticed the shift immediately. After decades of interviewing people, he developed an instinct for when someone was carrying more than they were saying. "Maria, you sound like you speak from experience here. Have you been in situations where language barriers affected you personally?" The question hung in the air for a moment. In the audience, a few people leaned forward, sensing something deeper was about to unfold. Maria's composure began to crack, just slightly, like a hairline fracture in glass. "Mr. Letterman," she said, her voice quieter now, "can I tell you something true?" David's expression changed instantly. The entertainer's mask slipped away, replaced by something more human, more present. "Of course you can." Maria took a shaky breath. "The hardest part of my job isn't translating for other families. It's translating for my own daughter." The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. "What do you mean?" David asked gently. "My daughter Elena, she's 8 years old. She has diabetes." Maria's voice began to break. "For 2 years I've been going to her doctor appointments, and I have to translate everything because I can't afford to take her to doctors who speak Spanish, and I can't afford the good insurance that would give us better options." David's face changed completely. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was a confession, a moment of vulnerability that transcended television. "Maria," he said softly, "how do you manage that?" "Taking care of a child with diabetes. That's incredibly difficult even under the best circumstances. That's when the dam broke." Maria's carefully constructed composure shattered completely, and tears began streaming down her face. Not the polite tears of someone trying to maintain dignity on television, but the raw, desperate tears of someone who had been holding back an ocean of pain. "I work 3 jobs," she whispered, and then louder, as if saying it louder might make it feel less impossible. I work 3 jobs, Mr. Letterman. Her voice gained strength even as her tears continued to fall. I clean offices at night from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., 12 buildings in Manhattan, mopping floors and emptying trash cans while the city sleeps. My back aches every morning, but I can't stop because that job pays the most. Then I come to the hospital to translate during the day because that's the job that gives me health insurance, even though it's not enough insurance, never enough. And on weekends, I deliver food on my bicycle, Chinese food, pizza, whatever restaurants will hire me. I ride through traffic and rain and snow because Elena needs her insulin, and insulin costs more than most people make in a week. The audience was completely silent now. This wasn't the feel-good local hero story they'd expected. This was raw reality, the kind that usually stayed hidden behind smiles and polite conversation, and the lie that if you just work hard enough, America will work for you. The insulin costs $300 every month, Maria continued, her voice growing stronger even as her tears continued. $300, that's more than my rent. Sometimes I have to choose. Do I pay rent? Or do I buy her medicine? Do I buy groceries? Or do I make sure she stays alive? Last month I gave plasma twice a week, $40 each time, just to make sure she had what she needed. I sat in that chair for hours watching my blood get pumped out of my body, and I thought about how Elena was at school, learning fractions, not knowing that her mother was selling her blood to keep her alive. David Letterman, the man who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, found himself completely speechless. He stared at Maria, and something shifted in his expression, a recognition of pain that connected them in ways words couldn't touch. Behind the scenes, something unprecedented was happening. The producers in the control room were debating whether to cut to commercial, but David's stage manager, recognizing the gravity of the moment, made a decision that would define the entire episode. Keep rolling. Maria, David said finally, his voice thick with emotion, how long have you been in America? 12 years, she replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I came from El Salvador with nothing but hope. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I learned English well enough, I could give my daughter a better life. And how did you learn English? David asked, though something in his tone suggested he might already suspect the answer. Maria reached into her small purse, a purse she'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago and had carefully maintained because she couldn't afford to replace it, and pulled out something that made David's breath catch. It was a worn, spiral-bound notebook, its pages yellowed, and its cover held together with tape that had been reapplied countless times. The cover had once been blue, but now it was faded to the color of old denim, and across the front, in careful block letters, someone had written, English, Maria's Notebook. I learned by watching your show, she said simply, holding the notebook like it was made of glass. The studio audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row brought their hands to their mouths. In the control room, the director quietly told his camera operators to get closer, to capture every detail of this moment that was clearly becoming something unprecedented. David stared at the notebook, and for a moment he was speechless. Show me, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. With trembling hands that suddenly seemed much smaller and more fragile than they had moments before, Maria opened the notebook. The pages were filled with careful handwriting in blue ink, English phrases, jokes, expressions, grammar rules, all meticulously copied and annotated in Spanish. The handwriting was precise, almost architectural in its careful attention to letter formation, the writing of someone for whom every word mattered because every word was a step toward a better life. I lived in a studio apartment in Queens with 6 other families, Maria explained, her voice gaining a storytelling rhythm as she found herself back in that time and place. 17 people in one room. We had one TV and it was tiny, maybe 12 inches, and the picture wasn't always clear. But every night at 11:30 I would sit as close as I could get with this notebook and a pen I had stolen from the hospital, and I would watch your show. I wrote down everything. The jokes, the way you talked to guests, the expressions you used. I called it my How to Be Funny in America notebook. David leaned forward, reading over the pages. There were entries like, "That's right, Paul," with a Spanish translation, "Stupid pet tricks," with a detailed explanation of what it meant. From the home office in Wahoo, Nebraska, with a note that said, "This is how Americans make geography funny." "You learned English from my show?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You taught me that English could be warm," Maria said. "Not just useful, but warm. You taught me that in America you could laugh about anything, even difficult things. You taught me that humor was how Americans connected with each other." David was quiet for a long moment, staring at the notebook. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "But Maria," he said, "if you learned all this, if you've been working so hard, how are you still struggling? How are you still having to choose between rent and medicine for your daughter?" Maria's face crumpled again. "Because I never learned the most important English phrase of all," she whispered. "What's that?" "How to ask for help." The words hung in the air like a prayer. The audience was openly crying now. In the control room, grown men were wiping their eyes. This had stopped being television and become something sacred. David Letterman stood up slowly. He walked around his desk and approached Maria's chair. Without saying a word, he knelt down beside her, just like he would if she were his own family member in distress. "Maria," he said, his voice steady but emotional, "you just asked. You just asked for help in front of millions of people. That takes more courage than I've ever had to show in my entire life." He stood up and faced the camera directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this woman learned English by watching this show. She used our silly jokes and stupid segments to build a new life in a new language. And now she's working 3 jobs to keep her daughter alive. That's not just courage, that's heroism." David turned back to Maria. "You know what? We're going to help. Right now. On the air." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his cell phone. "I'm calling my personal physician, Dr. Robert Chen. He's one of the best pediatric endocrinologists in New York, and he's going to make sure Elena gets the care she needs." The audience erupted, but it wasn't typical television applause. It was the sound of people witnessing something profound, something that reminded them why they believed in human goodness. David dialed the number on live television. "Bob, it's Dave. I know it's late, but I've got someone here who needs your help. Her name is Maria Santos, and she has an 8-year-old daughter with diabetes." As David spoke on the phone, arranging immediate care for Elena, Maria sat in the guest chair, clutching her notebook and crying tears that seemed to come from a place deeper than sorrow. From relief, from hope, from the overwhelming feeling of finally being seen. When David finished the call, he sat back down at his desk, but this time he pulled his chair around so he was facing Maria directly, so the desk wasn't between them anymore. "Dr. Chen is going to see Elena tomorrow morning, no charge, and his office is going to help you navigate the insurance system to make sure she gets ongoing care. But Maria, that's not enough. My production company is going to set up a fund to help with her medical expenses, and we're going to make sure you don't have to choose between rent and insulin ever again." "Mr. Letterman," Maria said, her voice shaking so hard she could barely get the words out, "I don't know how to thank you. I came here tonight thinking I was just going to talk about my work at the hospital. I never thought I would—" "You don't need to thank me," David replied. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute sincerity. "You taught me something tonight that I needed to learn. You taught me that when someone learns to speak our language by watching us be silly on television, when someone trusts us enough to let us into their living room every night, we better make damn sure we're worthy of that trust." He picked up her notebook again, handling it like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Can I tell you something, Maria? In 30 years of doing this show, I've interviewed presidents and movie stars and Nobel Prize winners. I've talked to people who've been to space and people who've won Academy Awards and people who've changed the world. But I've never met anyone who made me more proud of what we do here than you have tonight." David stood up and walked around to where Maria was sitting. Without saying anything, he knelt down beside her chair and took her hands in his. You came to America with nothing but hope. You learned a new language by watching late-night television. You work 3 jobs to keep your daughter alive. You translate other people's pain every day, and then go home and translate your own. And you did all of this without ever asking for help until tonight. That's not just courage, Maria. That's superhuman. The show ended with David holding Maria's hand while the credits rolled, her notebook open between them, a bridge between languages and hearts, and the promise that sometimes, just sometimes, the American dream remembers how to work the way it was supposed to. The audience gave them a standing ovation that lasted long after. The camera stopped rolling, and many people stayed in their seats for several minutes afterward, as if they needed time to process what they had just witnessed. 3 months later, Elena Santos was thriving under Dr. Chen's care, her diabetes well managed and her future bright. Maria had cut back to 1 job, translating at Bellevue full-time with full benefits and a salary that allowed her to live with dignity. And every night at 11:30, she and Elena would sit together on the couch in their new apartment, a 2-bedroom place with windows that faced the city they both loved, and they would watch The Late Show together, Elena practicing her English while Maria remembered the night that everything changed. The notebook still sits on their kitchen table, next to Elena's homework and Maria's medical dictionaries, a reminder that sometimes the most profound conversations happen when we finally find the courage to speak our truth. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, someone is listening who has the power to help us write a better ending to our story.